Hello and welcome, everyone. Hola y sejam bem-vindos. I'm Diana Schwartz Francisco, Assistant Instructional Professor in the Center for Latin American Studies and History here at the University of Chicago. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second of the GIS in Latin America webinar series, organized by the Center for Latin American Studies, or CLAS, and the Department of Anthropology, and sponsored by the Licht Stern Fund of the Department of Anthropology. I encourage you to join us for our third webinar on November 30th, in which urban ecologist Horacio Samaniego will discuss city limits in the age of smartphones and urban scaling. Please see the registration link in the chat. Before we introduce today's invited speakers, I want to start off by thanking Sarah Newman, Assistant Professor of Anthropology, and Lindsay Ortega, Student Affairs Coordinator of CLAS, for collaborating with me to organize this series. Our hope is that the series will not only showcase scholars working in the humanities and social sciences who conduct innovative research involving spatial analysis, but that it will also allow us to connect with our geographically distant colleagues in Latin America during this unusual remote moment. We also hope students and faculty join us to consider how spatial data can be used to enhance ongoing research projects, even while many of us are unable to conduct our usual field or archival work. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce our speakers for today. Dr. Luis Ferla is a professor of contemporary history at the Federal University of São Paulo, or Unifesp, and coordinator of the Pauliceia project, which he will be discussing today in his talk, titled Pauliceia 2.0, Collaborative Mapping of the History of São Paulo, 1870 to 1940, an experiment of open science and digital humanities. Our other speaker, Dr. Frederico Freitas, is Assistant Professor of Digital and Latin American History at North Carolina State University. His presentation is entitled Viewing Latin America from Above, Using Aerial and Satellite Imagery in Latin American Environmental History. Please join me in welcoming Luis and Frederico.
Thank you very much, Diana, for this invitation. Thank you to the Department of Anthropology and Center of Latin American Studies of the University of Chicago. I would like to thank also the translators, because maybe they are going to have a difficult task to translate my, let's say, a little bit peculiar English. And I take the opportunity here to ask you and everybody, if you have difficulties to understand me at any point of my presentation, please let me know, no problem about this. It's a great joy for me also to share this panel with my dear friend Frederico Freitas and to know a little bit more of his amazing studies. I separate my presentation in two parts. I'm going to talk about a platform that is already on internet, but it's a work in progress. It's a beta version destined to be tested. So in the first part, I will talk about the theoretical version of this platform, the ideal we have, our purpose, our final purpose, let's say. And in the end of the presentation, we will navigate a little bit on the platform itself. This is a joint project between my university, Unifesp, INPE, Instituto Nacional de Pesquisas Espaciais, the Public Archives of São Paulo, and Emory University of the United States, and it's funded by FAPESP. This is the team. It's almost 30 people. It's an interdisciplinary team. We have the coordination of the computational side with Karina Reis Ferreira, do INPE, and Carla Fuch from ITA. And we have a very convenient and interesting work division. If you have compliments, if you like our platform, our project, please write to me. If you are upset with the problems, with the bugs, please write Carla or Karine. Okay, it's a joke. They are very amazing people in the team. And IMACO is the research group I coordinate, history, maps, and computers, mostly with undergraduate students of the history graduation at Unifesp. Okay, what's the basic idea of this project? Let's imagine there is an interface on internet. In the background, you can imagine that we have a data bank and a historical cartographical base of the city, covering the period of the history of São Paulo that we are interested in, the end of 19th century and beginning of the last century. And let's imagine a hypothetical researcher. She's saying here, I studied the history of circuses in the city, just by chance. She can upload her data to the platform, points or polygons or lines, but as a kind of immediate reward, she can have maps and visualizations of her own research, of her own data, in order to be used in articles, final thesis, and so on. Let's imagine a second researcher. She's saying here, I studied the history of crimes in the city. In the same way, she can upload the data and she can have her own maps. And let's imagine still a third researcher, and she's saying here, how interesting. Wherever we had circuses, we had no crimes. Of course, this is a very schematic example, no scientific basis for this, but it's the basic idea. You can see here that she's not uploading anything to the platform, to this common platform, but the platform itself can be used as a meta source of historical material in order to subsidize reflections, articles, and so on. It is also a purpose of the project. What's the first main challenge we faced and we are facing up to now? I think it's very reasonable to admit that most of the researchers would have addresses to be mapped, to be put on the map. In other words, points which location is given by addresses. Of course, many of them, excuse me, many of them can work with lines or polygons, but not all. And here we have the first problem. How do we locate these addresses of the past? You know, the problem of geolocation today is a very mature technology. For example, through Google Maps or OpenStreetMaps, but they don't work with the past. We have to build a Google Maps of the past because of course the cities have changed a lot. The design of the city, of the streets, the name of the streets, and mainly the number of the houses and buildings. The solution we propose here is a data bank of known points. What am I calling known points? Points from which I know the address in the situation on the map, their location, and the time when these addresses were valid. With this data bank, I can extrapolate the address the user would like to know where it is. Let's imagine here a user would like to know where was Rua Vitória Street number 15. And our data bank has Rua Vitória number 10 here and Rua Vitória number 20 here. In this example, the geocoding system would locate the user's point exactly in the middle distance between these 2 points. And the material to work these data banks, the source, of course, is historical source, many different type of historical documentation. In this point, arises another key question. It's a huge task to build this data bank. It's a job for more than a group. There are a team of 30 people. Because in the end of our period, 1940, São Paulo had 1 million inhabitants. Can you imagine how many points we would have to locate to have this data bank? It's impossible. So the solution in this point is a pilot area. We defined a pilot area where our geocoding system is working on. This area is given by the map of São Paulo of 1868. It's the center of the city. It's downtown. You can see the pilot area here in the map of 1915 of São Paulo. And you can see the map, the pilot area here in São Paulo of today. Okay, but here another problem, another issue arises. In an open science project, a collaborative mapping, this could be very frustrating. You can imagine a research that deals with another neighborhood, for example, Pinheiros, a very important historical neighborhood in southwest of the city, or maybe Santana in the north part of it. And he or she cannot upload their data because our geocoding is not working in their areas. It could be very frustrating. And our proposal here is also another window of open science opportunity. Let's see it. Let's imagine that the tasks of our project were layers of a brick wall. We have scanning, vectorization, house numbers data bank we are talking about, geolocation algorithm, and the interface itself, which is in black letters. The team of the project can deal with it. The house numbers data bank, if the interested people could provide us this data bank for the region of their interest, the region can be incorporated to the geocoding area. And the final idea, it would lead to a kind of mosaic. Our platform aims to be a mosaic of areas of interest of researchers and group of researchers. Actually, it's going in this direction right now. We have at least three neighborhoods that are being incorporated by this way: Bom Retiro, Paris, and Liberdade. So these are the basic ideas of the platform. Let's see the most interesting part, the platform itself. You can find the platform very easily just writing Pauliceia 2.on in an engine machine like DuckDuckGo or Google. Fortunately, the first result is a red portal Pauliceia 2.0. Here's the first page. We can switch to English language. We have tutorials both in English and in Portuguese that will help a lot to build your own layers there. But the most interesting part is the map itself, this page here. we can start with the geocoding system. Let's try a very interesting address. Teatro São Pedro. São Pedro Theater. A search of 1925 says that its address would be Rua Barra Funda Street, number 33, and the year, it's very important. The geocoding is not able to work without this, 1925. Here it is. I taking out the zoom, Teatro São Pedro. This is a map of the city of 1930. So, geocoding system is working. It's inside the pilot area. In the left part here of the platform, you can visit the layers that are already fed on the system. Those many different subjects, homosexuals, houses, the black cartography, the cinemas, the industries, and so on. I'm just put 2 layers in order to give you as example. For example, the flood of São Paulo in 1929. It's a very important flood in historical perspective. I activate it. I can put also the flood of this year, 2020, to compare. And I'm going to put here also the industries of Bom Retiro. 3 layers is enough as examples. Let's take off the zoom. I will change the symbology. I can do this here. Let's put a color of hydrography, more bluish, like this. Okay. The default color is red for points, so let's change the color of the industries of Bom Retiro, of the first half of that center. Let's put green. I'm not saying that it's green technology in those times, but so in this way we are opposing different research from different people. I can say, for example, let's switch off the industries a little bit here, that these industries were not affected for that flood, for example, in opposite of these ones. I can look for information from each point. For example, these 3 industries here, and I have the neighborhood, I have the address, and maybe some, oh no, sorry, this is the point of floods in 2020. Points of floods of 2020, and the industries are green points. In the same way, I can look for information here. So I have the name of the industry, the address, the product, and the number of workers there. Confronting the 2 floods, the 2 floods, the polygon showing the huge flood of 1929 and the flood of 2020, we can see that most of the flood points are the same in São Paulo during almost 1 century. Actually, this conclusion was used by a very important newspaper in Brazil, Folha de São Paulo. After the flood of this year, they used this contraposition to say exactly this. The point of floods are almost the same during all these years. I put in these as examples of confronting different research to have a new conclusion. There are a lot of features here that you can navigate on. And the idea is that all the people can use and give us feedbacks, questions, suggestions, critiques, and so on. I just show you a little bit of the platform, but feel free to do this, perhaps starting just in this presentation, during the part of debate and questions. Up to now, thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Luis Ferla, for your excellent presentation. I really like your project. I also like to thank Diana Schwartz, Lindsay Ortega, and Dr. Sarah Newman for organizing this event, and the Center for Latin American Studies at University of Chicago for hosting this event. I'm really happy with this opportunity to talk a little bit more about my project. I'm going to share my screen too. This presentation, Viewing Latin America from Above, it's about using aerial and satellite imagery in Latin American environmental history, something that I've been doing for the last 5 or 6 years. And I'm going to show a little bit of my work on this. So I begin with this basic question: how historians of Latin America can use aerial and satellite imagery as sources. And I'm thinking about this, the work of this historian, David Biggs from University of California, Riverside. He has written a couple of articles and had published a book where he uses aerial and satellite imagery to to do environmental history, to do an interpretation of landscape change. And he proposes that aerial and satellite imagery should be thought as sources for environmental historians. There is a series of technological challenges that entail. First, you have to learn GIS, you have to learn a little bit about remote sensing, and also the types of archives that harbor this type of sources are different. So you have to know where to find these historical aerial and satellite images. And the goal, what you can do with this kind of source is you can reconstruct past landscapes. That's something that's really useful for environmental historians. You can assess the change in land use through time by comparing historical aerial image and present day aerial image. And because aerial imagery and satellite imagery do not discriminate the types of things that they record, you will eventually find things that you didn't expect to find, because these cameras, they record everything. It's a little bit different from, they're mostly automatic, and it's a little bit different from a human operating a camera, in that the human chooses the frame, chooses who's going to be in the picture. Is a little bit different. So I'm going to talk about 2 case studies. One is related to my previous research, and the others is related to a new project that I'm just beginning. So the first one is, as Brazil-Argentina is on the Brazil-Argentina border between the 1950s and the 2010s, and the other is the landscape of Brasilia, the modernist capital of Brazil, between 1960s and 2020. So let's start with the first one. So the first one is going to be part of 2 chapters of my upcoming book, Nationalizing Nature, who's going to be published next year by Cambridge University Press. And I started this project as part of my dissertation, and now it's part of my book. And in this book, I look at this border between Brazil and Argentina, and I look at these two national parks that were created by Brazil and Argentina in the 1930s, the Iguazu National Park in Brazil and the Iguazu National Park in Argentina. You pronounce Iguazu the same, but you write differently. And the two parks were created in the 1930s to protect the famous Iguazu Falls, but they also ended up protecting this vast expanse of subtropical forests. So this is a picture of the Iguazu Falls. That's one of the most visited landmarks in South America today. And it's a very interesting place because you have a confluence of different borders. You have the border between Brazil and Argentina. You have the border between the national parks and the areas that are non-national parks. And this map here, you can see some of the borders. In purple, you have the international borders. On the east, you also have Paraguay, and you have the two national parks. So one of the very interesting things about these two national parks is that up until the 1960s, 1970s, they, for a series of different reasons that I discussed in my book, they harbored large populations of settlers inside their territories. So you had about 2,500, 3,000 people living in the Argentine park, and the same amount of people living in the Brazilian park. And in the late 1960s, the governments of the two countries decided to remove these people they were living inside the park. And I discussed this process of removal, what that entailed. And I used aerial and historical aerial and satellite images to understand what was the impact of these people inside the parks from before, during, and after the removal from the parks. So this is an aerial image produced by the Argentine government of the Argentine park, and it shows a town that was established by the national park to attract settlers. And eventually this town, they retraced the boundaries of the park to have this town to be located outside the park in the 1970s. And this is a map of the Brazilian park. The Brazilian park is the yellow one. The Argentine park is the green one. The Iguazu River marks the international boundary and in the boundary between the two parks. And these grayish polygons is where the Brazilian settlers living inside the Brazilian park until 1975, 1978. This is an aerial photo of the Brazilian park, and you can see all this cleared area was cleared by settlers who moved there in the early 1960s and open small farms inside the parks. So when I started to do research on these two parks, I wanted to reconstruct what was the landscape of the parks and of the these entire borderland areas before settlers arrived in the region and arrived in the parks, during the time they were arriving, and after. And I went to Brazil and did the normal research of historians. They go to archives, they go to government archives. And one of the things that I found in a state agents of geography and geology in Curitiba, the capital of Paraná, that's the state where the Brazilian park is located, I found this old films of this aerial survey that was carried out by the local state government in 1953, and that they had like hundreds of images of the entire state, including the area occupied by the park. So the park was created in the 1930s. In 1953, they produced this survey of the entire state. And this is one of the many images that I found. I had all the images scanned by a third-party firm. And what you see there is actually the park on the right, and the park on the on the left, and the territory that is outside the park on the right. And as you can see, it's all covered by forest. So I had access to this set of aerial images produced in 1953. I selected 235 images that covered the area of the park and some of the areas adjacent to the park. And I also found, and this another group of images that were from another area survey produced also by the state government in 1980. And as you can see here, this is another image that covers sort of the same area, but in 1980, you have the area on the left, which is inside the park, still covered by forest, but the area on the right, which is outside the park, totally transformed into a landscape of farms. So this is 1953, and this is 1980. So for this 1980 set, I had 334 more images. So I start the process of georeferencing them, putting them in place. And as you can see here, this is a mosaic that I created with the images from 1980. That was a painstaking process of putting each individual image in place. I did that for the two sets of images, 1953 and 1980. And this is the area where settlers were living up until 1978. So by doing that, I had aerial images for the period right before the settlers moved into this borderland and then started living inside the park, and another set for the time when right after they had been removed. What we were seeing here are the footprint of the farms that they had established, but they are no longer living there by the time they took these pictures in 1980. So I also wanted to understand what was happening in between these two times, between 1953 and 1980. So I was lucky to find some images from this satellite program called Corona. The Corona Spy Satellite Program was a program that was launched by the CIA and the US Air Force in 1958. And between 1958 and 1972, they had all these different satellites covering the planet and taking pictures, taking analog pictures with film from different parts of the country that at the time they thought were interesting to observe, like places like the Soviet Union, China, Southeast Asia, where there was the Vietnam War, but also places in Latin America. These images from this program don't cover the entire world, but I was lucky to find some images for my area. For many years, these images were classified, but in the 1990s, they were declassified by the Clinton administration, and now anyone can buy them online at the US GIS website. So I went there, I did some browsing, and I found some images for my area. This is one of the images that I found for my area. This is the border between Brazil and Argentina and Paraguay. As you can see here, there's parts that are being deforested, but there's pretty much still mostly covered by forest. These clouds that you see here are some clouds of the burning of the forest that was happening as settlers were moving into this area. Something similar that what you see today in places in the Amazon, but this is an area that's very far from the Amazon. So with these three sets of images, 1953, 1967, 1980, I added some images for 2014, and I did some land use classification. I went on a GIS program, GIS software, ArcGIS, and I traced my interpretation of what each area was covered with. So I had these 5 categories: forest, cropland, recent cleared, urban, natural field, water. And I calculate calculated how much of change happened from 1953, 1968, 1968, 1980, 1980, and 2014. And I have some maps here to show you. This is 1953. The green is where areas that were covered by forest. As you can see, there's some areas that started to clear. These are the orange areas, especially on the border of the parks. In 1968, you have much more clearing happening. There's like all these farms that are being opening, and you have some parts of the parks that are also being cleared. And in 1980, the situation is totally different. You have the entire area outside the parks totally cleared, and you have the area that was where settlers had just been evicted from the Brazilian park also cleared. And then when you go to 2014, the area that was inside the park that was cleared is now no longer cleared because the settlers were evicted in the 1970s and and the forest grew again. So you have a more secondary new growth forest there covering that area. I didn't separate between old growth forest and secondary growth forest. So this is one of the uses that I had for this aerial images in my book, and I discuss all these issues, what that entails. I use the difference between the different years to make some arguments about how people reacted to the news that they were being evicted. I say that as they heard that the government would pay them to evict, way more people started to move inside the park to benefit from compensation from the government. And besides that, I also do a more visual assessment of different parts of the park. And here are some examples of some images between 1953 and 1980 in different parts. On the upper left, you have one corner of the park, and you can see there's a lot of clearing outside the park in these two periods. And on the lower left, you have the formation of this town. You have in 1953, you have just a little bit of the area of the town cleared, and in 1980, you have the entire town well developed, and so on. So I make some comments about that in my book. And another thing that I use this aerial image for is to do some sort of more qualitative investigation about different issues in my narrative of these places. So one of the things that when I started my project, one of the things that I thought I would find in the written sources was evidence of the presence of indigenous people living inside these parks before they were created in the 1930s. And it turns out that I didn't find any evidence, but I know that some people, some anthropologists who in the 1980s conduct interviews with people in the indigenous communities in the areas close to the park, they got oral evidence that some people lived inside the parks before the parks were created. So I used these aerial images from 1953 to identify some possible locations where these people could possibly have lived inside the park based on the clearings and based on the landscape that they describe on the areas that they lived. So I talked about that in my book. So this is one of the cases where I used aerial and satellite images to do a analysis of landscape change and environmental history. Another case that I have that I'm just starting is Brasilia. I'm moving on to a new project on environmental history of Brasilia. And for those who don't know, Brasilia was this modernist city that was built in Brazil and was meant to be the new capital of Brazil. Was built between 1956 in 1960, and up until then, the capital of Brazil was Rio de Janeiro, and they moved the capital of Brazil to the middle of the country in this area of Savannah, and they built this city in the middle of like a farm. And to build the city, they also created this federal district, which something equivalent to the US District of Columbia, but it's a little bigger, as it encompasses an area the size of a small US state like Delaware. So my goal with this project that I'm just starting is to produce an environmental history of both the city and of the federal district. So given my experience using Corona satellite images in my previous project, I began this project by looking for new Corona images for this area. And then I found a couple of them. I found this image for central Brazil in 1963. I don't know if you can see Brasilia, but Brasilia is located here. This is just 13 years after Brasilia was built. And the problem with this image that I found is that the resolution is not very high. So I'm not 100% sure I'm going to be able to use this image. But I also found some images from 1972, and these images are very good. They're very high resolution. And it's very interesting because 1972 is right before one of the oldest open source satellites of land monitoring started to operate, which is the Landsat images. But these images from Corona, they have a much higher resolution than the ones from Landsat, so they are way more useful. So I did some georeferencing. This is a juxtaposition of, on the left, images from 1972, and on the right, images from Landsat images from the present day. And I did the same thing that I did with the images from the national parks. I did some land use classification here. What you see is the green areas are natural areas. This area is not an area of forest, it's an area of savanna. The red areas are urbanized areas, and the orange areas are areas that are being used for agriculture. And of course, the blue areas is water. So I did some land cover analysis for using the Corona in 1972 and some Landsat images in 1985, 1992, 2002, and 2012. As you can see here, you see the expansion of some urban areas, the expansion of some orange areas, which are areas used for agriculture. But you also see some expansion of some green areas that becomes more homogeneous. So I had some data that I quantify the amount of land. And one of the things that I realized is that between 2002 and 2012, the amount of land that was covered by natural area increased, which is really interesting because it coincides with a time when you have a boom in the creation of protected areas inside the federal district. As you can see here, this is a map that shows the overlaying of different types of protected areas in this part of Brazil. So besides that, I also had a series of online maps that I did for these two different projects. For the first project, I had two different sites with maps. The first one I produced in 2014, and the second one I produced in 2017, and also just launched one for 2020. I did all that in using ArcGIS Online. If you go to my website, frederico-freitas.org, you can find links for all these maps. I'm going to show them really briefly here, so you can have a sense of this, how they look like. This is my website, so you can go and and find links for these maps. So the first map that I produced was when I was still doing my PhD, and as this one where I just put side by side the images that I had georeferenced from 1953, 1980, and 2014. And it's a good way to just browse them and see things in the landscape. I actually, as I was writing my book, I used this website to browse and to pan through this landscape and find things that were interesting. In 2017, I produced another website where there's a little bit of more like a narrative and an interpretation. I talk about different places and I use different data that I established, I created with this aerial and satellite images. And I did the same recently for Brasilia with some preliminary results of the images that I analyzed. And if you go there, you can see, you can play, there's different layers. You can change the layers and play with different aspects of this data. And that's all. That's what I have to say. Thank you everybody for your time, for listening. And I think now we can open for questions.
Thank you to both Luis and Frederico for your excellent presentations. And I also want to extend thanks from our end as well to our interpreters, Silvia Escarcega and Elida Healy, for making this possible and accessible to our colleagues in Spanish and Portuguese. So again, we're going to move to the Q&A. If you could please type your questions there in the feature. Remember that you have the opportunity to upvote with a thumbs up if there's a question that you would like to see answered so that we don't have redundancy. I'm going to ask our presenters, Luis and Frederico, to sort of take turns addressing questions. Some will be addressed to both of you, obviously. It looks like we have 4 so far. So I'll leave it to one of you to read the first question and respond accordingly. Thanks.
These questions of Ayala Levy for Luis. How does one troubleshoot when an address isn't found? This has happened to my students using Pauliceia. Do you have any tips for how to change one's search? How might the platform change to accommodate or respond to failed search? It's a very interesting question, Ayala. Thank you very much for this. I have to say that when I did my presentation, I picked up address of Teatro São Pedro not by chance. It was on purpose because it came from the research of Ayala Levy, actually, and she had her PhD in this very University of Chicago, an amazing project about the history of theaters of São Paulo. And she kindly gave us her material in order to help us to test our platform. It's another example of open science that we are looking for. So Ayala, thank you very much for being here and to bring your question. First thing, please, you and everybody, give feedback to us through the support email that is in the contact page of the platform. It's very important for us to know the problems you are facing with. We are dealing with this, the report of the errors. We are trying to improve the messages when it's not working. I just don't know if your problem was during the geocoding, because I don't know if it was clear. We have 2 different activities on the platform. I can use it simply as a Google Maps of the past. I don't have to log in there. I don't have to do any registration to do this. And I put an address and it simply shows where it is. But it's not loaded on the platform at this point. The next time that I will load the platform, it will not there anymore. It will not be there anymore. But if you create a layer, in this sense, you are enriching the platform, so you have to be logged on, and you have to follow some steps. Sometimes you have to create a CSV file and to upload to the platform, and the system will locate the points or the line or the polygons you have created. In both process, we have problems, we have bugs, of different types. So you have to write us, please do this, because the computational side of the team must know what the problems the people are facing. I don't know if I answer your question, Ayala, but another important thing, it's very good to know that you are using the platform if you are students. I'm very happy to know this. Thank you very much.
I'd really like to direct both of you to another of her questions, which has been upvoted several times, to ask both about your about best practices in doing this kind of work, especially in a collaborative endeavor. So I'll read the question. Both of you have worked on collaborative, labor-intensive historical GIS projects. What best practices might you share with someone trying to get such a project off the ground? On the user's end, how do you think users should be accessing and citing the data or maps that such projects provide? For example, how does a researcher appropriately give credit to one layer in Pauliceia 2.0? How does a researcher keep track of and incorporate changing data in a dynamic database? So either of you want to, maybe perhaps Federico, you could.
Okay, I'll try it. Yeah, I think my project is not on the same scale as Luis's, because it's mostly centralized on myself. I had people who helped me throughout the years, and I credit them. But I'm the connection between the different phases of the project. Whereas, like, I think that Ferla's project is more like collaborative. I see there's like more people involved. It's more ambitious. The amount of work they've done is much greater. There's an element of crowdsourcing, at least if I understood correctly. So I don't know. I think that my practices are very idiosyncratic. So I'm not sure if I have any good advice. I mean, I think the first thing that you have to do is try to guarantee some funding for your projects. So you manage to have people working with you, and because you always have a lot of people, different people working, you make sure that you do a lot of work in establishing good metadata for all the data that you create. That's very important. So a way to do that is to think about your project in terms of phases. So at the end of each phase or each cycle, you make sure that everything that you created in terms of data will have the right metadata that will be useful for next group of people to know what was done before, and to have all the sources and the transformations that were made to create that data documented. This is particularly important for historians because the way that we think is that there's a lot of compromises that you have to take when you create this type of GIS data that is historical in nature, because the historical data is not, it's different. So you have to be really attentive to the type of metadata and the type of documentation that you create to make sure that you can retrace those steps back and understand what you did. about how does a research give credit. I think in my case, the way that people would give credit is either by citing the published material that I have published, like my book, or by citing the websites that I have published. I think that would be the easiest way. But I think in the case of Pauliceia, I think Ferla's is a little bit different because they have a greater variety of materials and materials coming from different places. So I think it's maybe you want to talk a little bit about that, Luis.
Okay, thank you, Federico. Thank you again, Ayala, for this question. There are three parts of your question. Let's begin with the first one. How to advise someone that's trying to get such a project off the ground. There is no manual, of course. There is no tutorial for this. It varies from the context of the country, of the universities, and so on. But I would advise that the first step would be to put together a team to do this. It's not possible to do it alone. In this case, of course. And this group should be interdisciplinary, try to build bridges with computational people. They will be needed anyway. But in a sense, it's also, I think you realize that I'm a little bit enthusiastic about open science, but open science, again, would help because, for example, if the people are thinking something very similar to our project, think about other city, maybe other time cut. Our technology is open. These people would not need to begin from the ground to do this. It's in the GitHub. You can find our codes there. And of course, you can talk with us to change methodologies and so on, but the idea is exactly this. And in this direction, I think also that all the people that are dealing with technology in history should talk more, exactly as we are doing just now with this webinar, because technology is new for most of historians, and we are facing new problems, new challenges. Perhaps Federico had solved a problem that we are beginning to face in our project, and the other way around also. If you talk, if you put together, if you talk more between digital humanities, I think a lot of solutions came out in this way. The citing thing, of course, we are using the Creative Commons license. You can download any layer that is on the platform. The citing should be in the fast way, just the website of Pauliceia, but if you are entering in details, keep in mind that we have two kinds of authors of the layers. I can put on the platform the research of other people. I can read the book of Federico, and I can create a layer of his research on our platform. So there is the author of the layer, and there is the author of the research. Both are informed. There is a part of the platform, a description, that says the theoretical references and the authors of the layer itself. And how does a researcher keep track of and incorporate changing data in a dynamic database? A very simple question, very short question, but very complex answer. I will try to resume here. we have a slide time. I didn't have time to show you a slide pointer behind the page in order to select the period you want to be shown on your view. And we are working on GitHub. We're starting to work on GitHub to keep track of the changes in the codes. It's very important for our metadata to keep control of our process, but also to have other people that would like to use them.
We have another question that's been upvoted twice from Sarah Newman about unexpected finds. She said it seems that in both of your projects, there are some unexpected results of your research or unexpected finds. Just wondering if and how these types of projects change the way that you conduct your research. Do you begin by collecting data to see what questions emerge as you visualize and combine that in new ways? Do you define your research questions and then explore data sets, sort of which is coming first?
I can answer that first because both things happened to me. In my first project, I had the project and I started doing research, and then I started in the middle of the process of doing research, I found this material and decided to use this material. So I had this idea of using aerial images to understand landscape change during this time and to understand what were the effect of the establishment and enforcing of the national parks on this landscape. So my questions came before the material, before using the material, the aerial images. With Brasilia, it's kind of the opposite. I have this vague idea that I wanted to do an environmental history of this area. And I had, because of COVID, I had not had the chance to go to Brazil. I'm kind of stuck here in the United States. So I started doing this research with this historical satellite images to identify places, regions, threads that I can use to conduct this environmental history. So by looking at what I did, these things that I identify in these maps that I produce for Brasilia will guide some of the questions that I will have when I go to the archives, luckily, hopefully next year. So it's kind of like happened both ways with me in different projects. And I think that for a lot of people it depends on when you start doing this type of research in your project. Do you want to add something, Luis?
Yes, please. The surprises. Thank you for the question, Sarah. We think that in a collaborative platform, when we have such a huge array of different data being fed, that the surprise would be very frequent. We hope this. We actually would like to lose the control of it. It's our purpose. Let's see what happens. Up to now, we are beginning to test the platform. We didn't have great surprises, but one. And the surprise itself was on the newspaper. We had a previous project. My group, IMACO, carried out the mapping of the main floods of the city of São Paulo. I just showed you one of them, 1929. And after the flood of this year, I opened the newspaper in February, in this pandemic year, before the pandemic. And Folha de São Paulo, the most important newspaper of Brazil, had a full page talking about the persistence of the floods in the same regions of the city, using our map. our map of our project, crediting it, of course. And then with this, we created the layer afterwards. So it's a little bit a trick question to your answer, because it's first we have the newspaper material, then we had the layers, but it showed that the potential of the platform, because confronting these two layers, the conclusion is very clear. São Paulo is dealing with huge floods almost every year, but mostly in the same regions. It's the contribution of the history of São Paulo, the historians, to public politics towards it. So we are, the team of the project are writing an article just now, just talking about this. We hope surprise, and we think and a collaborative and open platform, these would be very frequent, because we have so many different people, different teams, different issues, and it depends on the creativity to confront all of this, to integrate different perspectives in the same computational environment. It's our aim. If you, as most of the things I'm talking about, it's a project, it's very new for us also, and we don't know if we will succeed. We really don't know, very frankly speaking. We will try and see what happens. Up to now, we are very happy with the results, but many questions are still open. Thank you.
Again, I want to thank everyone for coming, to our excellent presenters, of course, and for all the attendees. Both of our presenters have provided us with information related to their projects and the kinds of repositories that we might be able to access. Both Federico wrote in the chat, and the Center for Latin American Studies has also included some resources that Luis had provided to us as well. So hopefully you can find more of interest there. And once again, I want to plug our third and final webinar session that will be on November 30th for those who would be interested on smartphones in the age of sort of urban design and urban understandings. So once again, thank you very much to all, and especially to Luis and Federico. And yeah, we will be in touch